maybe, their happiness level is maybe like an 8 with this person that is the only person that they've ever met, the only person they've ever interacted with. And then you could take, there's a possible world where they meet somebody who's far better. Maybe, they like the temperature the same, in the house all the time or something like that.
But
or they want the same amount of kids or something like that. So
you can make that argument for everything.
There could be. Okay.
Yeah, you could say, well, Andrew, you're in a very happy marriage and you're very happy with your marriage, but there could be a world which exists in somewhere where you could have met a woman who's even better than Rachel. And so you could apply that universally to every marriage which exists currently, every relationship which exists currently across the board. I'm not sure how that would be helpful to this.
Right. But so remember what we were talking about was the sample size for the individual being very small. If you've had a larger sample size, then that kind of mitigates that factor there. So when you look at somebody who has maybe 2 partners that they've dated before and they're marrying their 3rd partner or something, they at least have a data set to look at, like, okay, well, here are the possibilities of things that I like and things I don't like. And I've kind of been able to weed through and have the opportunity of having a more fulfilling relationships with a 3rd person because I have been able to weed out, these are the type of people I maybe am not as compatible with.
Right,
whereas
okay.
that person, the person who hasn't had any other experiences, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing.
No,
I'm not saying it's necessarily bad.
Well, it's actually strange, in fact, because they would still be at the mercy of the same thing. Perhaps, though, if they hadn't gone off and had the 2nd or 3rd relationship and had only stayed in the 1st relationship as a virgin and had nothing to compare it to, then in an alternative world, they would have been much happier by that standard. And that's like, it would be the same thing applied here.
Yeah, that. I'm fine with saying that those people in those relationships are happy, but there could be something where they are happier once they have a bigger data set. So it's obviously with more knowledge about the world, like you have the ability to pick and choose better, you're more informed on the things that will make you happier, right?
Well, I would agree that you gain more experience in the things that are happening around you, perhaps, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are positive experiences or that you wish that you had known them.
Yeah, they don't have to necessarily. I'm just saying that with the bigger data set, you have more of a likelihood of finding the thing that's going to make you more happy.
But wouldn't this imply that the data set which was done on virgins and their happiness is somehow smaller than the data set which is done on people who've had 2 or 3 partners? Unless you're just saying, well, it's just trivially true that the people who've had 2 or 3 partners have had sex with more than one person, so we can just view them in a different light. It's like...
No, maybe just to clarify, I'm not talking about the data set. Do you mean the data set of people surveyed? Are you saying that you think that I'm saying that?
No. I think what you're saying is that women who have had 2 or 3 partners necessarily have more experience than the virgin. And
they
so
have a bigger
because
data
of that,
set, yeah.
They don't know what they're missing.
The virgins, people who are virgins, don't know what they're missing. Yeah, I think they have less of a data set.
But why would, okay. They have less of a data set when it comes to sleeping with more people, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but why would that be a bad thing?
Right, because they have the possibility of looking for people or things that they're more compatible with. So let's just say the virgin, this person who's dated one person only has access to the data set of this person that makes them 8 out of 10 happy or something like that. Whereas the person who's had access, and engaged in intercourse or maybe had just, personal romantic relationships with other people, they have access to data sets of people who make them a level 10 happy or a level 8 or a level 7 or something like that. They have more access. They have access to more data, right? That individual has more access to data about what causes them to be happy in a relationship.
Okay. But again, couldn't I just apply this to anything? Couldn't I be like, well, there's not enough of a data set for us to really determine that if people don't drink gasoline, that they wouldn't be happier if they didn't have the experience of drinking gasoline before.
We do have we unfortunately have data on that, and it turns out really, really bad.
Too. And it's a pretty large sample size of virgins.
Okay, so what's being confused is not that the amount of people who are virgins.
No, it's not being confused.
There is, because you're saying the sample size of virgins that we have.
You're equivocating.
Hold on. Breathe.
Yeah.
You're saying right now that the amount of virgins that we have is less. I'm not saying that. We could have 50 virgins and 50 people who have had sexual experiences.
I know you're not saying that. What you just got done saying was what we do understand the correlation between gasoline and people's happiness. It's like, okay, but we do understand the correlation between virginity and virgin's happiness in marriage. It's the same thing back and forth. What would be the experience differential there? Why shouldn't I go drink gasoline to know that drinking gasoline, it probably is going to make me happy?
Okay, so let's get this clear first. I will say this, the person who decides to go drink gasoline, let's just say you have two people, one who has never drank gasoline, the other person is going to. Both of them have the same knowledge about the facts about what that would do to them. But there's also, some like non-zero probability that they could
love it,
live a happy life and love drinking gasoline. And that's, their thing.
Which there are people, I guess, who do. But anyway,
there
go
are freaks. But yeah, look, so these people, the person who did in fact drink the gasoline, and regardless of whether or not the outcome was good, if they hated it, if they loved it, whatever, that person does in fact, whether that's for the worse or better, have a bigger data set to go off of. Do you agree with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
But should they do it?
Should they? No, obviously not.
Well, then we're back to this.
We know about the significant negative outcomes.
Same.
Of that.
I would just make the same argument back for this, that if they shouldn't drink gasoline because we know that there's significant bad outcomes for that, but your argument for they should have more than one sexual partner, even though we know the negative outcomes for that, and you say, but there's a possibility that they just don't know what they're missing, I just make the same argument with gasoline.
Well, just to be clear, because going back to the prompt wasn't that people should have multiple partners. The prompt is more so about, and maybe you can read it back specifically, but it was about the fact that if you're looking for a partner, the main concern shouldn't be the amount of partners that person has.
I don't think it's a main concern.
The prompt was, you shouldn't care about body count if you want a relationship.
Yeah, shouldn't.
Right, and by that I mean that shouldn't be your main concern. I mean, I'm allowed to clarify, right?
Sure.
Okay, sure.
I think that's totally fair. Yeah, so you're not actually saying that shouldn't be a factor.
That in no case you should ever care. Yeah, no, you should care in some cases. Of course.
Yeah, like, so if it is the case that I have good evidence to support that a woman staying a virgin, right, and she's religious, like, for instance, let me give you an example. If you're a religious man, right, and you would have certain virtues which are attributed to your religion.
Sure.
One of which could be to marry a woman who's virtuous, and a sign of chastity. A sign of virtue could be chastity. That's in Christianity, for instance. Chastity is overwhelmingly large when it comes to the idea of virtue. So you would think men like that actually should be selecting for body count, right?
They should if the person isn't currently acting in that way. So the problem that you run into here is, like, obviously people who were prior atheists can be reformed. They can find Christianity, they can find God.
Totally agree.
And maybe they've had some, harlot past where they've gone out and they've slept with 50 men and done all these terrible things and extorted people and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But when that person, and maybe this could end up being like a semantic thing, but when that person, comes to the faith and they find God, that body count still exists, right? Unless you think that it doesn't.
It still does.
Right. So you agree that there could be a perfectly suitable partner for a man who is a Christian, right? And one of the things that happened to be in her past was that, she had all of these sexual partners, but now she has, found Christ. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it wouldn't be right for him to consider that if she's changed.
Yeah, no, it would be totally right for him to consider it.
Why would he consider that?
Because it would still show a pattern of not upholding the same virtues he's looking for.
In the past, but not currently. But if she's currently upholding those values.
Well, your past behavior is generally a really good indication of your future behavior.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine to say. But if he has really good overriding evidence that she will never do that again, that she, will go forward and be...
I don't know what evidence he could have for that.
Let's just say he has some evidence, regardless.
Yeah,
but if he has that evidence.
Yeah, if you were to say, like, he had a crystal ball in front of him,
right,
and he could see the whole future, sure, I wouldn't dispute that. But that would be baked. That would be baked into the fact of knowledge itself. He has pre-existing knowledge this will not happen, or some really overwhelmingly good, compelling evidence it wouldn't. But absent that, which I would argue in most cases they wouldn't have, then it would show a pattern of behavior against the same virtues he's looking for, where he could select for somebody who's upheld those virtues.
There's also, so that's fine to say that if he has reason to believe that she'll still engage in those behaviors, regardless of whether or not she's in a committed relationship with him, that's a kind of separate question, but an adjacent question.